Hello, hello. Yes, we're on? Yes, we're on. Welcome, everybody, to the pleasure panel. Yes! Let it out! Oh, I'm so glad you guys did that. That's wonderful. Because one of the panelists said there's 3 ways to relieve tension, and 2 of them are so inappropriate. We can't do them here, but that one was one of them, and that worked really, really well. I'm Michelle Ernsting, and I'm the Director of Program Development for RNW Media, which runs the Love Matters program. And I am delighted to be here talking about pleasure with you today because it is so fundamental to family planning, sexuality, sexual health, and sexual rights. And it's taken a really long time to open a space for a conversation around pleasure at conferences like this. And that's kind of surprising because it's one of the main reasons why people say they or their partners choose to have sex and enter into relationships. So it's something we should be talking about. But it's clearly also really a taboo subject. And there's a lot of reasons why that is, and one of them is probably because people see pleasure as a driver of bad decision making. People make hasty decisions, and that leads to bad health outcomes, unwanted pregnancies, and disease. But today, we're here to reframe pleasure. Woo! And frame it as a driver of good decision making around sexual health and rights. And I want to say, I think one of the reasons why it's been a struggle to talk about pleasure in settings like this is because there's a lot of confusion about it. And a lot of people say, why are you encouraging people to have sex? And that's not what a pleasure approach is. A pleasure approach is giving people the opportunity, the possibility to dream and act on happy, healthy relationships. Love, sex, and relationships, whatever the setting is that they are in. And can I have the next slide for a moment? Oh, next slide. Great. I just wanted to highlight the work of the Pleasure Project because, of course, yeah, some of you, I just heard a yes, a clap. Okay, that's good. Give it up. Because they've done some of the formative work in understanding pleasure, how we can define pleasure. Anne Philpott just entered the room. And how we can start mapping it and really understanding why it should be an essential element of the work we're doing, especially with young people in their relationship to their sexual health and rights. So before we go on from here, I just want to ask a question. I just want a show of hands. How many people in this auditorium use what they see as a pleasure approach? Just put your hand up if you're using a pleasure approach. That's really great to see. Really, you know what? I'm delighted to see that number of hands, and I'm also delighted to see the number of people who don't have their hands up, because I didn't want to be talking to the converted today. This is a conversation where we're really going to hopefully open you up to how other professionals are using pleasure. And we can see a pleasure approach is spreading. And that's not just because it's sexy and engaging and it's fun. It's spreading because there's a real return on investment. If you use a pleasure approach, it will deepen your impact. And we're going to try and show some evidence of that today from our panelists. So we have the amazing good fortune of being able to hear from 4 pleasure pioneers, professionals who have firsthand experience of what using pleasure means, what the benefits are for your practice, whether you're an educator, whether you're a clinician, a doctor, or a researcher. So we're going to talk with them about their work. I've got 4 key questions for them, and then I want to open the floor up to you to ask whatever you want about pleasure. So I'm just going to introduce each of them. May I have the next slide? Is it possible to get, yes, there we go, almost. Next slide. There we go. So Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, or Dr. T, I'm going to call her today, and that's her handle, from South Africa, clinician at Nalane for reproductive justice, country co-lead for Global Doctors for Choice, and member of the Global Advisory Board for Sexual Health and Well-Being. Next slide, please. Yes, Dr. T. So, and next, Dr. Pei Yuxin from China's Sun Yat-sen University. Her work involves using sexual pleasure as a means to promote erotic justice. And next, Lindsay van Clief, working in the Netherlands. She's the content strategist for the Global Love Matters program, digital communities engaging young people on love, sex, and relationships to help them make healthy decisions about their sexual health and rights. So, and last but certainly not least, Akiko Bonilla is an SRHR counselor with Mexico Vivo, an online moderator on Hablemos de Sexo, Love Matters Mexico. She uses pleasure as a gateway to talk about sexual health and rights as a way to set boundaries. So, first question, and starting with you, Dr. T. If you can just tell us about the work you're doing and why you brought pleasure into your approach.
So I am a medical doctor and I'm still in clinical practice. And in my younger years of internship and community service, I used to work a lot in community clinics. And a trend started to emerge where there would be more young people waiting in the car park between me coming out of the clinic and getting to my car to ask sex-related questions. And it got me thinking about just the setup of the health system as a whole, and how geared and ready it is to assist young people who are either not asking questions about HIV prevention or pregnancy prevention, and there wasn't much else just in terms of how we were looking at young people. And so those conversations for me were interesting because they would range from, how do I break up with my boyfriend, and the contraceptive I'm taking is making my vagina dry, what can I do? And of course the typical male questions, is it long enough, can I go hard enough, how many more times can I go? But a lot of it, the dominating theme was always around pleasure. And that's how I got onto social media, because my time at the clinic did end. But there's more other young people who do not have someone like myself that they could ask these questions face to face. And though the youth are on social media, the mobile penetration in South Africa for mobile data is quite vast, and that's how I do what I do. I'm online and I answer questions. Sometimes we start topics deliberately to try and demystify but normalize pleasure. Because it's really been the missing link between sexual rights, sexual health, and pleasure. And so I think the journey here, it's proof that this stuff actually works. And there is research, of course, we know around comprehensive sexuality education. And I always make the analogy that, a lot of parents do look forward to taking their children to a driving school. Not necessarily because they have money to pay for a car for them or that they want them to drive the car and be an accident. That's not why you do it, right? But you do it because you want them to learn the rules of the road and the signs and how to be courteous for whenever they buy a car or you buy them a car or they drive a friend's car. And that's how we approach and how I approach, sexual health education, is to say you are giving young people information that's affirming of their rights, and you have to bring in people of sexual and gender minorities, because even in literature still produced today, you don't have that view. Everything is about cisgendered heteronormativity, and so to be deliberate in how we look at people who are disabled, people with chronic illness, other young people who use hormones for other things other than family planning, like endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, diabetes. So there's really so much to talk about, and the sexual pleasure angle gives us a wider range of how we can approach and really reach people with the information they need.
Great, thank you very much. And that's a fascinating observation that so many people were waiting in the parking lot to ask those pleasure questions, right? That tells us we have to open up a space, not in the parking lot, for these types of questions.
They can park in my Twitter. That also works.
So, Dr. Pei, would you like to tell us about your work?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Yuxin Pei, and I'm from a university in Sun Yat-sen, China, Guangzhou. And in my campus, students always call me Professor Pei. However, if I go out, in some occasions, people actually call me Professor Masturbation. That's because in 2012, I used the social media to do a competition. And I asked the people to send me the videos on masturbation discourse. And the advertisement is like that. Send me a 3-minute video on masturbation discourse. You can win $1,005. And then, actually, we got a lot of public attention because of this competition. But however, I did this not because I want to, to know what people doing there, but only because I actually was doing a project on how to promote sex health. And during my research, surprisingly, I found that sex always related to shame, to pain, into self-discipline. Even people do masturbation. It's kind of someone's own business. However, they feel so scared to talk about it. Some people feel like they are kind of getting a sickness. Yeah, some people think they are kind of too indulgent in masturbation. And some people even feel like it's a crime. And I can't believe that happens in 21st century in China, because actually we always identify us as a already developed country, no more a developing country. So masturbation projects introduced me to the world of sexuality research. And till then, actually since then, I also started to do sex counseling. I'm not trained as a sex counselor, but people just keep asking me questions. Yeah, in the very beginning, they asked me, Professor, do you masturbate? And I said, so what? And, and then they started to ask me a lot of questions related to sex. And I realized that actually people need an authority voice to give them legit permission, to have their own sexual life. So that sounds very, unreasonable, but related to our culture, we fully understand that sex is not a physical thing. Yeah, it's always related to culture, historical, psychological issue. So actually, that's why I now engage in the sexuality research and sexuality practice. I do couple counseling, individual counseling, and also I do public talks like this to promote sex health and sexual pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you, Yuxin, Dr. Masturbation. And now, Lindsay, if you want to tell us about your work.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, so much for inviting us on this panel. I wanted to talk a little bit about Love Matters, which is an online suite of websites and social media where we talk to youth about love, sex, and relationships. Right now, last year alone, we had 300 million content views across our sites of youth looking, do you hear that? Yeah, youth looking for information on love. Love, sex, and relationships. Okay, it's not, it doesn't need feedback. Sorry about that. We have a community of over 30 million young people worldwide, because we're in 7 countries in 5 languages, and we're still growing. And pleasure is so central to the way that we connect with young people around the world, because we're meeting youth where they're at. If you talk to a young person, they want to know how to kiss, how to make that person that they like them back, and what to do on a first date. These are the kind of topics that we need to engage in and really have serious conversations about, which can then lead to the more kind of family planning topics like when to use contraception, talking about safe sex and STDs, consent, and all sorts of other communication aspects that fall into these relationships. But by meeting them on these more fun, lighter topics, we can really engage and gain their trust. And pleasure is also one of the more central approaches because it's for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're in a relationship, if you're not in a relationship, if you are lesbian, gay, bisexual, curious. it doesn't matter because you can please yourself, you can please your partner, and you can still want to know how your partner or other people can please you. And so it's a very universal way to approach very sensitive and taboo subjects. So.
Thank you very much. And finally, Akiko, Bonilla, if you want to tell us about your work.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Akiko Bonilla. I'm from Mexico. I work as a psychotherapist and a sex educator in Fundación México Vivo and Hablemos de Sexo y Amor, which is the Love Matters platform in Latin America. And I've worked with a lot of young people, teenagers. We deliver workshops, educational, sex educational workshops to schools, universities, colleges, and every institution that is supposed to educate. But sometimes they don't dare to talk about sex education in our country. So, well, in several countries. So we deliver this information, and we deliver also health services. We have a community center there. And in our online space, which is Hablemos de Sexo y Amor, Love Matters, we start these conversations Lindsay was talking about. I have seen that most of the young people don't dare to ask these questions in the consultation room or in the classrooms, and they feel more comfortable and they feel safer talking about these matters in the online space. So for me, it's been very interesting to learn how this phenomenon is helping us to build a bridge between the offline and the online world for young people's health.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think for those of us working in the pleasure space, one thing that always happens when you're starting a project is people say, pleasure's not going to work here. And it's the gatekeepers who are usually saying that. Pleasure has no place somehow in this particular space. But when we start talking about pleasure with clients, with users, with visitors to platforms, something else happens. So I'd love to hear from you, when you start this conversation, what is the response? Please, who wants to jump in first?
Okay, I'll go first. So the response is different with different people. So some people are absolutely relieved that you're actually even touching on the subject, especially in the consultation room one-on-one with clients, because a lot of the times, they don't even really know how to really express what it is that they're feeling. And I find that especially even in individual therapy, where women come in with questions like, I know I could be having better sex, but what's the problem? And some people realize for the first time that they've never had consensual sex. And so you kind of like, so it can take a very different way than how you think. But the funny story is that my son and my niece, I was staying with my mother, and she just teaches them anatomy like we do with the nose and the eyes and everything, so they know a penis is a penis and a vagina is a vagina. And so when the episode of the TV show was going on the first time, the very first thing I say is vagina, 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 and then we cut off to the opening link, and my son just laughs. She's like, oh, Granny, your daughter, she's busy laughing at vaginas on TV, and he moved away, like it wasn't even a thing. And I think that's what it's about. It's about getting young people as early as they can to know their body parts, firstly. And that's fine as it is. And for them in that context, the idea was she mustn't react in a way that's going to make him feel ashamed or bad for saying even the word. And for that day, that's how long CSE was. It was those few seconds just because of how she reacted. And in some other ways, of course, especially online, we're going to get a lot of people who are asking and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one going through this. And that has created an immense online community, especially of young Black women who are affirmed in their sexuality, in their expression of that sexuality, but in terms of demanding the same attention, because I find that often in relationships, especially where it's a man and a woman, the sex kind of starts with his erection and it ends with his ejaculation, and not much else happens in between. So it's how do we get women to start being confident to negotiate the type of sex they are having during sex? Because it's no point waiting afterwards to say, well, the sex is bad, but are you giving feedback? And that ties into consent, right? Because constant feedback, affirming feedback is very important for you to get the sexual pleasure that you want. So it's very different in very different settings. And of course, the schools still remain the most resistant to the idea of comprehensive sexuality education despite research, which is quite unfortunate because I think schools, provide a very good platform which is structured, where learners already have a relationship with the teachers. And how do we help the teachers be able to deliver the content, And those who are not able to, how do we help parents at home when children come back with questions from school to be able to answer that? So I think for me, everyone should have comprehensive sexuality education, and I think if more and more people realize the benefit, it will become easier. But I think the backlash or the responses are not always as positive as we think or would like.
Maybe to stay, you mentioned the classroom, and to go to you, Akiko, and talk about the work you do in the classroom. How do the students or the young people that you're meeting respond? And then maybe you can take us into the online space and see if there's a difference there.
Yeah, sure. Well, the response is it's funny because for the teenagers, it's like it's fascinating. They, in the offline world, they are ashamed, but they are curious. I can see they're interested in the topics, but they don't dare. They feel embarrassed because there is always like a teacher around or some social worker or an adult there, and they feel exposed. So when we talk about Hablemos de Sexo y Amor in our workshops, and I'm like, this is a sex-positive approach, online website, go and ask your questions. We don't mind whatever, there's no stupid questions for us. And they feel comfortable about this, and they go to our website, and then I meet them in the online space. I can see the difference. I can see that they feel, I don't know, like if they were talking to a friend and they can share whatever their passions, desires, curiosities, questions, and doubts are, and they don't feel judged. And I think that's interesting because sometimes they don't have nowhere to go. They don't have no one else to ask these questions. Their parents they say they are too young and they don't have to know these things. Teachers, same thing. So this is a very interesting bridge we are building. So, and it's a feedback we are having because that way we can know what they are wanting to know, what they need to know, and then we go back to Hablemos and work in these contents, and that's like an ongoing process now, feeding back.
Okay, and maybe Lindsay, maybe you can look at this more from a global approach in different settings when you're meeting young people. Is it a similar response they have, and what is that response?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the same, right? Where initially people are a bit more hesitant. They're like, oh, that's not going to work. Maybe that works in those other contexts, but here it's more conservative or we're a bit more quiet. But inevitably, it works every single time, and we see that by how quickly we can grow communities of youth around these subjects. And I think it goes back to what Dr. T was saying in terms of just normalizing this, right? Because so much of the sex education that they hear is about diseases, is about condoms, is about pregnancy, and it doesn't always validate their motivations and desires. And so by having these conversations, around kissing, around tips for what to do in bed, or where do you put your hands, and what do you do then? And those are the things that they're really curious about and they want to have normalized. So not just their body, but also how to interact with other people and how to have, meaningful relationships that are going to lead to the positive, experiences that they see in the movies and on TV and in everywhere else. They just want that too. And so I think we need to normalize on all subjects, not just the ones that are specific around health and to the body. And it's really interesting because what you were mentioning earlier, Michelle, where a lot of partner organizations and other more classic health organizations say, oh, that's too, we don't know if we can actually say that, but they come back to Love Matters, a year or so after we start in these communities because we get millions of youth engaging on these subjects on a daily basis, and they say, okay, maybe it does work, so how can we partner and how can we move forward? So we've been able to see kind of that full circle from the, actually, we're not sure to, okay, now this is something and how do we move forward? And so I think it might be more of a fear than it is really based in that reality, and that we need to start trying to engage on more, topics around pleasure so that we can really engage in stronger communication with especially young people.
And maybe I can just ask one follow-up question, because I think in the digital space there's always a real fear that there's going to be a lot of harassers, haters entering into the space, and people don't want to have this content online because they're really worried about that. So maybe just to talk about the experience.
Yeah. you don't get a lot of hate in this world. I think people are coming from a place of curiosity and concern. Oh, okay, thank you. And yeah, there's expected to be a backlash, or that people are going to, be trolled a lot, or that there's going to be some sexual harassment. And again, in the various ways that we do this with over, 30 million people, we really don't see that. It's not that big of a concern. And of course, there's a few outliers, but those can be easily moderated because we have sexual experts at hand to answer these questions and to curb the conversations. But really, people are just curious. That's it. They want to know if they're normal. They want to know if that desire or that dream or that kind of thought came out. And that's all they're really trying to validate in these communities, and especially with peers, right? Because that's the beauty of social media, is that you're engaging young people with each other in safer spaces to talk about these kind of things.
Can I follow on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, and then we'll get back
So
to
just
Dr.
on the cyber security, it's a real concern because young people are now the producers of their own sexual content. So they're not just texting or sexting, they are taking videos, they are taking clips, and they are sharing this material. And depending on what legal context you work in, depending on what country you come from, there may be some real consequences, for example, for sharing sexual content. And of course, the age issue being a big concern. And so I think that part of what a sex positive movement looks like, for the millennials, for the young people coming, but going into the future, is taking into account the issue of cyber intelligence, because we know when things do go wrong around sexual health, sexual content for young people online, it can be really, really dramatic, and it can be life altering. So I think it is important for them to know, how do I take a nude? Why must I not, forward a clip or a photo that I receive that has sexual content? And what is erotica? What is pornography? All of those questions start to come up. And again, I think in terms of cyberbullying, some of behaviors are normalized, and children are groomed early. So if you are not having the conversations with your children as a standard, you're not going to pick up that they've been grouped. They're not going to feel confident to come to you to say that someone said something inappropriate, or was that really inappropriate? I think so. It has to happen within a context of just a general open communication with young people, so that even when they are feeling harassed and bullied, they can have someone they trust to tell them.
Great. Thank you. And Yuxin, I'd like to invite you to talk about what happens with your clients when you bring pleasure into the...
Yeah, actually, people's response are so diverse. Young people feel liberating because finally they found a professor who can talk about sex in a public area. And some young people, especially who kind of very active in LGBT organizations, they feel like my knowledge is not enough to teach them. So sometimes they are very challenging. They actually wanted to lead our discussion, and they want to show me some advanced skills they already handled. It's okay for me because I'm always ready to learn from young people. And but also the other young people, probably they could feel excluded. Yeah, because they never talked this kind of issue before. I met a young male student, and he told me he never watched the porns. He never masturbated. Immediately the other people started to fight him, and they said he's lying because you can never survive if you don't watch a porn, if you don't masturbate. But actually, I trust him because even in China, we are not very religious people, but still we have concerns of sexual morals. And this student feels not moral if he doing this by himself, if he's not married. Yeah. And also some women feels some young women feels offensive. Yeah, because it's like I'm encouraging people, as you said, it's like you are encouraging, if you talk about sexual pleasure or masturbation, it's like everyone should do it. Yeah, and they feel like, no, it's not my choice. I want to keep my own lifestyle. And so, but you are talking this in the public, and I feel, being offended. Yeah. And so I always try to invite all the voices coming out into one platform. And I try to tell them sex is something, it's a lifestyle, but meanwhile, everyone can choose what he wants to do because everyone's circumstance is so different. Yeah, even they are all young people, but their family background, their education, and their planning of their life are so different. So we cannot only advocate one certain lifestyle, but I need to tell them sexual pleasure is such a beautiful thing, and if you want to try, you just try it, and it's rewarding. And if you want to do it, you do it by yourself. You don't have to worry how other people look at you because it's your privacy, you know. You cannot so internalize the sexual crime. And even some people have kind of functional disabilities because they thought they masturbated too much. Yeah. So I think that's already a kind of operation to those people who's done it, but who feels not legitimated to do it. So yeah. From their response, I always try to adjust my education goal and my education skills.
So for people in the room who might not yet be using a pleasure approach and might want to, I'm hearing a couple of entry points, and masturbation seems to be an entry point for a lot of US practitioners. I'm curious if anyone else can talk about entry points to open this up and to improve your engagement. Maybe Akiko?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, in Mexico, there is this machismo thing, and it's similar to what Dr. Pei was saying, Professor Pei, sorry, because I think that when female young people get involved into these pleasure topics, they empowered and they feel more like they own their own bodies, they own their own pleasure, and that's another gate to set boundaries. They learn when to say yes, how to say no, when to say no. They learn what is violent and what is not, and not to judge themselves. And for male young people, for example, I think that's a relief. They think, they're always thinking they have to say yes to every girl or every whatever person they like. And when you say, it's okay if you say no, you don't have to be a sex machine, you're not a penis, you're a person, they feel relieved as well. So it's interesting, because when you open up these conversations and we open these dialogues, they are like, oh, really? Can I say no? Or, for example, girls, I am not for my partner's pleasure only. Can I have orgasms too? Not just faking them, you know? That kind of conversations are very important, because we can talk about rights, we can talk about health, we can talk about how you can explore your own body, know your own pleasure, and set these boundaries, and have this sexual intelligence in your relationships as well. Thank you.
So now we're going to move on to a really important question, and that's about evidence, right? I think everybody wants evidence that there is a pleasure dividend, there's a return on your investment in this. And again, the Pleasure Project has done such great work in compiling a literature review on what works, but I think we need much more measuring evidence. But we're going to put the question out to you all to come with your best persuasive evidence story for our audience here today, to give them some examples of how you think your work has benefited from bringing a pleasure approach in. Dr. T, do you want to start?
Okay, so Well, mine is interesting because a lot of the sex content and the sexual production is for consumption, right, by mass media. So things like analytics help a lot. We get to see the trends that people are interested in. But even when we bring in topics that are not already in the mainstream, we can see the reaction and the uptake of that. And where it used to be very difficult in the past to get, journalists and editors to cover stories with a sexual pleasure angle, whereas now I'm getting requests all the time for people saying, well, there's a day of, whatever day, health day, how do we link this to sexual health and sexual pleasure, which has been one of the greatest things. The other thing, of course, is being the member of the Global Advisory Board for Sexual Health and Wellbeing. I didn't know where they found me, but they invited me to come on this board, and I was just minding my own business on Twitter, so it was good that, so your colleagues pick up these things, and it actually does matter, and then you start to find out about all the different guidelines and the colleges of obstetric and gynecology that are, affirming the fact that sexual pleasure, it's a right, and the fact that it's not just the focus on health and disease prevention or treatment. The other thing, of course, being published in places like Teen Vogue, right, talking about pleasure in the way that we do. It's one of the big indicators, of success. And I think, again, just when you see women that look like you, that sound like you, even if it's face-to-face or online, just saying thank you, because for the first time I had an orgasm. And you're thinking, what? Well, really? Did we do that? And we do, and that's the most important thing for me. It's what individual women feel they can be empowered to do and what decisions they can be empowered to take for themselves. And of course, the issue of the society is important because sex happens within morality judgments, sex happens within some religious beliefs and views, and so one of the things that I advocate for is to end virginity testing as a means test for tertiary bursaries, which is something that used to happen still in South Africa, but also show some of the dangers of it. So it's not just about fun stuff and orgasms and all of that, but there's also other side of sexual practices which are harmful. But if you can show how stopping some things is helpful for people, it's really great. Globally now people are talking of female genital mutilation. And how much of that, or how does it represent itself, in different communities? It's very important to then talk about. And issues of post-abortion care, right? People want to know, I've had an abortion, when do I start having sex again? And, you have to have those conversations. And so it's not just about giving a contraceptive immediately afterwards, but there's so much more around how people think about their own sexuality.
So did you all hear what Dr. T said there, that when she started, people were like, don't come to us with that content. And now she's at the point where media is asking for this content. Teen Vogue is asking for her content. And for all of you who are engaged in information campaigns and thinking about how to get a word out and thinking about how hard you have to push, if you can find a model that turns into a pull model for you, where people are coming to you to say, share this message, this is great, we can totally connect with our audiences, with your core message around sexual health and rights, that's a pretty fascinating outcome. And again, I think talking about that normalizing aspect of pleasure, how it creates this bridge with wider society, these are things we have to start capturing, measuring, monitoring media, seeing the uptake of these things, because gosh, you can get so much more impact out of your campaigns when that type of mainstream media is basically backing you up. So thanks for that example. Yuxin.
Yeah, I do have numerous evident stories, but the most interesting phenomenon I noticed is that in China, since 1949, the establishment of People's Republic of China, gender equality becomes our basic national policy. And women easily get equal rights to get employed and also in other aspects of our economical life. And for example, my audience mostly are women who get very well educated. And I noticed they feel like they never treated unfairly only because they are girls. That's also based on another social context, is that the one-child policy. Because most women in China who's in their 20s, 60s, 20s, 30s, and 40s are all the one child of their family. So the family actually put all their resources on this one child's education. And that's why women have ability to pursue their career and their dreams. However, when related to their sexual lives, and like sexuality, immediately you find women realize that they are not equal to men. For example, a lot of young students, female students, always ask me a question. Their boyfriends asked for the first sex, and because they want, they always persuade their girlfriend, like, if you love me, please give it to me. And the girls always wonder if does he love me, or does he only love my body? And I always ask them, is your body not yourself? Yeah, and how do you regard your feelings? How do you feel your body is ready or not? Why you always focus on his thinking? Yeah, so actually, no matter how younger you are, how modern you look like, still in their consideration, males' needs, males' sexual pleasure, and males' requirement is so important, especially in their sexual lives. And they never realize that's inequality. Yeah, I think that can be a bottom line of us to measure our equality, gender equality. Yeah, and also I have a group of women entrepreneurs, and they are the bread owner of their family, but still in their sexual lives, they feel that they are not fulfilled. And they don't know how to ask their husband to fulfill them. Probably in their homework, like they could say, oh, today you wash dishes, today you take care of the children, because they are the main bread owner. But in bed, actually, they are so vulnerable, they are so fragile, and they are so frustrated, and they don't even know how to ask, how to solve this problem. So, yeah, when I tell them, actually, sexual pleasure is a justice. Yeah, I tell them you deserve sexual pleasure, and no matter how kind of strategies you use, like you can find a lover, you can find a sex toy, and you can do whatever you like if you think you cannot negotiable with your husband. Yeah, if of course, first you go to marital counseling, and but if your husband refuses to do it, you can solve your own issue. You have this ability and you have this right.
Okay. 10 fingers also.
Yeah.
So I think you just provided us with our tweet of the day, right? Sexual pleasure is justice. Tweet now. Okay, Lindsay, what's your story?
Yeah, and I just want to quickly reiterate on some of the themes that I'm hearing, because I think the pleasure approach is so intertwined with consent, right? A lot of people say, oh, you're talking about pleasure, you're going to have young people go, sleep with everyone and just have all the sex. And maybe that's true, but it's also about teaching people about what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and when you can move forward and when you don't need to move forward. It's just putting it in a much more positive light than when you frame consent around saying no, right? We all know that that's important, but it's also important to say yes and really be able to say that enthusiastic yes, like, this is what I want, this is when I want it, and this is who I want it with. And so it's really, these are the same messaging, it's just in a slightly different way, but I think it lands in so much nicer when you frame it in a positive pleasure perspective, as opposed to just being like, no, my body's not to be touched, my body's not to be seen, my body's not to be shared. And so it's something to just really think about. But in terms of evidence, I think I'm in a slight advantage just because we're on the digital space, and the digital space really allows us to see who comes in where and what topics they stay for, if they read an article, if they go. And we can just really confidently say that anything that deals with love and relationships, sex, marriage, or even kind of that flirting and how to meet are 60% more popular than the more standard STDs, contraceptives, and anatomy type content. But yet, so people are kind of Googling these questions like, what is love? How do I kiss? Or what's the first kiss like? They're coming to our site, they're seeing these tips, they're seeing this information, but they continue to go through the Love Matters website and engage on some of these other topics, right? So on tips for oral sex, it includes about how to use a condom or other barrier methods to protect themselves. And actually, when they get to this more from a family planning perspective, serious or hard content, I also see that the traffic's better. So they actually spend more time reading the content that I would consider more educative than more just kind of talking about fun. But we would not be able to get and have the people stay for those conversations if we weren't also engaging. So they come for the pleasure and they stay for the education. And we see that across all the different communities and all the different cultures that the Love Matters website is active in. Because it's really about what are people Googling on their phones, or what are they searching in Baidu in China, and how are they trying to get that information, because we're trying to make sure that they find evidence-based information and not just porn or other more tabloid kind of scandalous, conversations. We really want to make sure that things are based in reality and based in a pleasure and rights-based perspective so that they can, move forward in their relationships.
Great, thank you. And great. I love this enthusiasm. And actually, just before we go to Akiko, we're going to go to questions after this. So if you've got questions, get them ready. I think they've got microphones in the room. So get yourself set for that. And now Akiko.
This is tough. I want to talk about two important subjects for me. One is that in Mexico we have the first place in the OECD countries of teenage pregnancies, and an investigation says that Mexican teenagers are like they don't think they have more options than to get pregnant and be a mother. So for me, in the consultation room and in the online room space, it's an opportunity to let them know that they have options, that they can negotiate contraception, and they can plan their maternity. They can ask themselves if they want to be mothers or if they don't want to have kids. That's important because they have the right to make that decision. And there's another subject that I want to put on the table, and that's the LGBT community. I think that in the online space, they feel so much safer, and I feel so much closer to them in that space. They can feel they are not alone. They can know they are not alone. They can ask whatever they want, and I think that's very, very important because every life matters, and everybody deserves the right to information, good quality information, and good quality health services. And we can talk about that in the online space because our culture, it's not like prepared to talk about it in public. So I think these are both important subjects in every country. But well, I see in Mexico these problems because we have like these religious things around, and that's a barrier still.
Great. Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
So to go to questions, is there anybody? Oh, we have a couple of hands up. Okay, I saw your hand go up first, Anne Philpott. So I think there's a microphone coming around. Yes, great.
Just stand so they can see you.
I mean, this is fantastic and brilliant, and it's great to see this panel here, and I think very well needed, and great to see the whole field of the pleasure agenda and practice expanding, and I think, as you've all said, that's only going to make us more effective in reaching people and ensuring their well-being. What I would like to ask the panel is, it's fantastic to hear about how, as practitioners, you've been able to have these pleasure conversations. And I think now what do we need next to help you to continue to practice, and can we bring other people into this field? Like, what kind of tools do we need? I think it's great to have the content that brings them with the pleasure and stay for the education, but what do we need next to be able to have actually face-to-face conversations, or know that people are translating that into being able to have more pleasurable, safe sex lives, and how do we track that?
Is it on? Okay, so thanks for that question. And that's basically the crux of what I'm trying to do, is to make sure that you have more reach using social media and digital platforms, because it is where young people are, and to get as many people as we need to, we're going to have to write as much as we can and speak as much as we can. But the key component of that is linking young people to service. So a lot of what I do in terms of the Twitter stuff is mapping service providers for specific needs. It may be psychological, it may be post-assault care, the needs are varied, but it's when we can really then link people to services that are affirming, they can get treatment in dignity. I've spending a lot of time on medical school campuses this year in South Africa, assisting medical students and nursing students how to be the best healthcare providers they can be, using a toolkit, around sexual health, helping them become confident, because if they are not moved and they're not doing the personal development required to do this authentically, it comes through. And that's when the moral judgments come in, the religious stuff comes in, because it feels comfortable and that's people's sort of default setting. So the big thing for me is if the network, the digital hub, can move from my cell phone to a room of people and train other young medics and other young people to give this information and make sure that when we do link them and refer them onward, we know that they're going to get quality service, and that the options will be there. Because unfortunately, contraceptive stockouts are still a reality at the moment, even condoms, oral contraceptive pills. So it's also then, once they make the decision to be a contraceptive, do they have enough modern choices? And the issue of lubricant, I ask everybody, do you have a lubricant? If you don't have a lubricant, what kind of sex are you having? Get one. It's one of the gold standard prescriptions, lube and more lube, because that enhances pleasure. When you're using condoms, the latex itself can be quite drying, right, and irritating. So when we're giving out condoms, they need to come with some lubricant as well. You are increasing adherence to the barrier method use, while also increasing pleasure. And once we can discuss about the female condom, the outer ring, it rubs on your clitoris during sex. If there's a bit of lubricant there, you're gonna have, vaginal and a clitoral orgasm. Who doesn't want that? So there's so many ways of engaging and increasing uptake of the tools, but making sure that people stay choosing them, because that's not the problem with young people. I find they have the information, kind of. Someone somewhere has told them something. But why are they still making the decisions to still not use condoms despite the information? And I think it's because we're not putting enough emphasis on service provision that is pleasure-centered. So the information is pleasure-centered, but the service itself, it's still not pleasure-centered.
Wow, great. Anybody else want to jump in on that in terms of what is needed, toolkits?
Yeah, I would love to jump in that. I think it's a great question, and I think it's really important, and I think this panel is a really good start to that, because in reality, we need everyone in this room to start taking this forward. We need service providers, we need academics, we need psychologists, we need people online. Everyone needs to start taking this forward, or it's not gonna work. And I think, here at the International Family Planning Conference, family planning is inherently about sex, but yet it's not being spoken about. We're not talking about it, right? A lot of these, everyone was in the HIV and AIDS conference earlier this year. Again, it's about sex, but we're not talking about it. Our sector is failing in many respects to talk about the actual act that's getting us here, and the motivation and the desires that drive us to have families and to have relationships. And so thank you all for participating here. And hopefully we can keep doing this, not just in this space, but in all of these other spaces, because we need everyone. And there's this beautiful research just written about the erasure of pleasure in academic research, and also challenging the reproductive health journals and a lot of these other spaces, because we're not talking about it. So please, 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 if you can walk away with anything today, please just start talking about sex Scary word, it shouldn't be, and pleasure.
Okay. Yeah.
I actually want to share a tip of how to persuade the people to use condom and a lubricant. Yeah, because a lot of people said it's not natural. Sex should be natural. And so I asked them, do you use iPhone? Do you use mobile phone? They said yes. And I said, mobile phone is not natural. So why do you use it every day? And I said, they realized actually we don't, we are human beings. We are, now use high technologies to improve our quality of life.
Akiko?
I think that we are all focused in young people, and I think that adults need to get involved into pleasure as well. We were at the booth yesterday, and there was a lot of people coming to the spinning wheel. Have you seen it? It's the coolest. And there is a dare question that says, when was the last orgasm? No, a truth question. Sorry. When was the last orgasm you had? And there was this person that said, I'm too old for that. No, if you're a human being, you're a sexual being. It doesn't matter how old are you. You have a body, you have a desires. So we should all talk about this in a different ways or however we feel comfortable, but we have to start these conversations.
Great. Thanks for that excellent question. And thanks for all these great answers. And maybe for the next question, if people can introduce where they're from. Anna's from the Pleasure Project. She didn't say that. But for the rest of you, so yes, you in the second row. Yes.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jose from the Philippines. I'm working with the Commission on Population in the Republic of the Philippines. I'm also providing education for teachers who are the ones who are conducting education, sex education, to the children or to the youth. However, every time I'm going to introduce pleasure as part of my health teachings or health family planning, there was a time that my attention was called by the government that, why are you teaching pleasure? I said, it's part of family planning. So how can we address that kind of issue if the authorities are prohibiting you from discussing these kind of sensitive matters? Because I believe if I'm going to discuss pleasure as part of my family planning method, there will be a higher increase of my CPR. Because every time I'm going to explain, like, hey, if you're going to use family planning, you can spend more time having sex, and you can reach your orgasm or something like that. So how can we lobby in the government if we want to really use pleasure as one of our an investment for family planning?
Okay, who wants to take up that lobby question?
That's a good one, because I think it links to advocacy and the fact that we can communicate, we can be service providers, but unless there's a strong component of advocacy and holding the governments to account. I mean, sex is political, our whole lives are political, our bodies are political, right? And I think there has been this extreme politicization of young people's bodies and what they can do, and if you invest this, then they will give you this, and they'll be the future labor force. So there's so much invested in controlling people's fertility, but also sexuality. And I think, as in my perfect world, as part of induction at work, at school, anywhere, everyone would have CSE. Because if you haven't been the recipient of comprehensive sexuality education that's affirming, you won't know what it is about. And because a lot of the program designers, a lot of the implementers, a lot of the people in governments who sit and make these decisions mostly disintegrate HIV, they disintegrate abortion care, they disintegrate contraception from comprehensive services. And I think it's when they understand the importance, but also we kind of just have to get on with it and do it. Find people you can work with in the communities, grow your networks, build coalitions, because there's still so much more that you can do as a group, because at the moment you are taking personal cost, right, for a bigger pleasure justice movement. And I think the more you can have more people who are researchers, clinicians, policy makers, people who are in economics, they can make a different argument depending on whoever you're meeting in government. So that you can make an economical case for pleasure. You know, we've made a justice case for it. You can make every single thing. And for us, I think even like when you're looking around societies that are heavily patriarchal, I'll give you a reason, an example in South Africa. We still lead in the world in terms of new HIV infections, despite everything that has happened in terms of research and development in the country. But young women are still burdened with virginity and purity. And it's virginity and purity for the benefit of men, right? For upholding a good family name, or for being respectable and being that youth who's not like the rest, okay? And that's partly the problem. So young women they are preserving vaginal virginity, but they're having anal sex. And unless you go in to ask and have the pleasure question, you are not going to understand why people are being tested and being said they're virgins, but the same young women are still having HIV, and some of them go on to have pregnant, surprise pregnancies because they don't know that thigh sex can still get you pregnant. So there is so much that you can show, just even on a societal level, that some of the ways that we engage and some of the practices we call culture and tradition can evolve to meet the needs. And sometimes you may need a chief, you may need a princess in whatever society you work in, that person that the community listens to and trusts, and they can be your mouthpiece. We don't always have to be the face of the message constantly. Find allies and work through that way, and look at it as an advocacy sort of strategy. Yeah.
And maybe it's also helpful, there's some good documents that are emerging now, also from IPPF, and maybe I can ask you, Lindsay, to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the IPPF and the Global Advisory Board for Sexual Health also came up with a toolkit called Fulfill, and it's about fulfilling sexual pleasure. And it's a really great way to talk about how you integrate it into some of the work that you're already doing. But I understand the issue in terms of there's certain gatekeepers, like governments or schools or parents, that might start to nitpick that away. But I think it's still good to keep advocating for it, look at some of the research that is there. I also mentioned that we need to do more academic research, which I absolutely believe, but there is still some pieces there, right? There is some research that youth can know what a condom is and then can list off all the STDs, but they don't understand that you use it in sex, right? Because sometimes pleasure is also just about putting the context to what we're talking about. Because when do you use that condom? Because what is sex? When does it start? When does it end? When do you bring it up? I mean, these are all those kind of nuances that you need to start dealing with. But yeah, there is some really good starting of toolkits and research out there that you can take on, but we all need to continuously advocate for this as a stronger message.
Okay, next question. I think you in the front row, and then you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for a brilliant panel, and I like that you raised some issues about FGM and how you can use a pleasure approach to link a bit more diverse discussions. My question is about access and equity, for example, about pleasure. So we know that the female condom is 15 times more expensive than the male condom. Mm-hmm. We know that women are made to pay a premium to have pleasure. Mm-hmm. So how do we ensure that we don't, in our discussions for pleasure, we don't feed into the very commodified discussion of women's pleasure and women's bodies? So I think it's a really exciting discussions you're having, but I would also like to hear a bit more on the power discussions, and that a lot of our framing on pleasure is burdened on the woman in terms of not just being a recipient of pleasure, but also a provider of pleasure to male, and that has led to over-sexualization. So I'd just like to hear those balances in the discussion and how that comes up. Thank you. I'm Catherine from Kenya, and I work with Femnet.
Great, thank you. Who would like to take that one up?
Should I start?
Yep.
Okay. So that's a great one, because the commodification of the vagina and the vulval area in general is something that it's there. But yet the research in terms of medical research and development is still, like you're saying, focused on male pleasure. As much as women have been complaining about all the side effects of contraceptives, there still is no development because people don't rate female or women pleasure highly, and that is half the problem, and that's a systemic structural thing as well. But I think it's important to make people realize that sexual pleasure is a right, because once it's a right, it needs to be budgeted for. People need to have access. But if it's still as a nice to have added extra, then people will be like, well, just pay out of your own pocket. But if you can link the issue of diabetes and neuropathy and the fact that vaginal dryness is a real problem, menopause, right, and vaginal atrophy, and then you can start to show that it's not just the fact that people have a right to be on treatment for chronic illnesses, but they have a right to have the side effects of those illnesses managed. And one of the ways is lube. So now lube just stops being just a luxury, it becomes a necessity of part of people's treatment. You know, hypertension medication, some of the side effects cause erectile dysfunction, but the reverse is true, that you'll have more male-centered developments and solutions to pleasure and what they can do. But I really do think that we do need to start framing sexual pleasure within the rights framework so that people can't feel like they can just opt in or opt out, you know, and the issue of HIV, you know, we're diagnosing young women with HIV. A lot of them are on ARVs, they are undetectable, they want to start having families. How do we start having pleasure conversations with those people? Young people who were born with HIV, who are now teenagers, no one is helping them with disclosure. You know, no one is helping them with sexual debut and how do you start? I mean, the issue of having, using barrier methods as for oral sex. But do young people know where to buy the condoms, you know? So often in the trainings that I do with young people and teenagers, we go shopping. Everyone has money and they go and practice how to look at the shelf, look at the different options, sizes, and how to go and pay for it. Because these are all obstructions, from the cashier to the person packing the groceries for you, to the lady or the guy who may look at you weird because you may feel like maybe they know your mom or they recognize you. So there's so many other ways, even those who can afford, that they still don't get. And that's just one of the ways that I think we should frame it as a right, but link it to all the other medical health issues and show why investing in pleasure tools helps with just general wellness and population. And wellness is a right? It's one of the sustainable development goals. And sexual pleasure and health is part of wellness.
Does anybody else want to address this?
I don't know if I get the question right, but I want to share a little bit more about this. I think that pleasure is so focused on genitalia, you know, and our whole body, it's pleasurable, it's erotic, and I think that we should eroticize more the use of safe sex or the use of condoms or whatever. We have to work more on that, how to. I think young people and anyone can think about safe sex as like boring or lame. We have this challenge. I think that we have to make it funnier or sexier, or to make up some ideas, more foreplays or whatever. I think we have to, again, open the conversation to get involved with these other ways to get pleasure and to get in a close relationship with your body, with your desires and what you like and what you don't like. I think that's the important part, because if you recognize what you like and what you don't, you have the power to say yes or no once again.
Okay, maybe we'll take another question. The man with the green shirt. Sorry, I'm prioritizing people in the front because I wear glasses, so I can't see a lot of you at the back, but I'm going to really squint.
Thank you for this interesting panel. I've been attending many panels, especially one on the demographic dividend. So when I heard about the pleasure dividend, I said I should come. But my question is, usually we talk about male involvement in all these issues. I'm also surprised that you only have a female panel.
No, you shouldn't be surprised.
So my question is, how are the males involved in your programs? Because we know in many instances it's about two people usually, man and woman. Of course, there are other types, man and man, woman and woman, and self. But I would be interested to know how the men are involved in the programs. My name is Barnett Ndianabanji. I'm UNFPA country representative in Afghanistan.
Great. That is a really, really excellent question, and I know we've got some fantastic answers on that one. And maybe I'll start with you, Lindsay.
Yeah, and I think what's good is that bright pleasure is irregardless of your gender or sexual identity, and so it's not even just about men and women, but also everything else and in between. And it's also, in terms of the Love Matters project, our staff is actually pretty close to 50-50, oddly enough, because I think that's not
Even if
that
it wasn't,
usual
it's okay.
in the comprehensive sex education world. So we have quite a lot of men that are involved in all of the different aspects, from the programming to the content to the moderation and engaging in these conversations. But actually what's really interesting is that on the digital space, there's just more men globally. They have more access to the internet. They have more usually socioeconomic freedom to have smartphones and tablets and computers. So actually around 70% of our audience is men in the places that we're working in. So we're having these conversations about pleasure with men. Now, that being said, I think it's a conversation you should have with everyone, regardless of, everything. And so this is not about one or the other, it's about all.
Can I add on that?
Yeah.
So as a clinician, often people will come with, whatever problem they think they have, and eventually we'll get to the sexual pleasure talk. Often you will find that men's questions are very specific around penis size and performance. But I find that men have a lot of myths around women's bodies and what the vagina is supposed to do or not do. So a lot of my focus when I engage with men or men, I'm invited to speak, those are some of the things that I'm talking about. The fact that male pleasure is so normalized, but men themselves expect to be pleasured by women. And not enough is spent on listening to feedback from your sexual partner and not seeing that as an attack on your manhood or the fact that you can't perform enough or the fact that she may think your penis is too short and therefore, So there's a lot of scenarios that men create around their sexuality, but what that looks like in terms of pleasure. And it's often very linked to what women give up and what men take. So my work is focused around that. What does sexuality mean for a man, but also for people of various genders, right? Because people are asexual. You have people who may be, for example, a gay man, but working as a sex worker having penetrative sex with women. You may have the reverse, where you have a lesbian woman who's a sex worker who's having sex with men. So the focus is not so much about, I'm a man, I'm a woman, but it's actually about what type of sex are you having? Because you could very well be, I can make assumptions and say, well, you just look like an older black man, so you obviously have a wife. But a lot of men are having sex with men outside of their marriages. So the questions for me, it's not so much about, are you a man, are you a woman, I'm only speaking to women. It's about what type of sex are you having? Is it penis to anus, penis to vagina, vagina to vagina? And the advice you give is based on that, not because you are a man or you are a woman. It's based on the type of sex that you are having, and I found that's more affirming.
My project also has a lot of male participants, but maybe at least 50% male participant. And I feel like men also have a lot of sexual anxiety. As you said, they are so worried about their frequency, the timing of penetration, and size, this kind of quantity numbers. And meanwhile, some men also told us, like we also have some misunderstanding of men's orgasm. Yeah, like some men said, for them it's not. We thought they only focus on penis, but actually not. Some men do concern about if they can fulfill their sex partners, and that increase their pressure when they perform partner sex. And so I feel like men and women need a mutual understanding to each other in heterosexual relationships. Of course, in homosexual relationships, still, even you are a woman, you're having sex with a woman, you are not necessarily to know everything about it. We are all need knowledges to engage in sex because we just had a very short history to talk about it. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Akiko, men and boys.
I think that men are so concerned about pleasing their partners or about their penis sizes, for example, and they have the opportunity to know that that it's not their responsibility to please their partners. I think that each one of us is responsible of our own orgasms. Nobody else. And but yes, I think that we, at least in Mexico, we're lacking of the men's view. I think that they think they know everything about sex, and they think that they just because they ejaculate, they are having orgasms, or these kind of ideas that we deconstruct in the conversations we open in the online world, especially in the online space. And because in the offline space, they feel judged. They think that the people is going to say they're less of a man if they open these conversations. So, yeah, I think it's an invitation for the male community to dare to talk about this, and to what Dr. T was saying, to learn about what kind of sex they want to have, and to know about all kinds of sex relationships. And maybe pleasure is not only, again, about intercourse. Maybe cuddling, it's pleasure. Maybe just, I don't know.
Dry humping.
Yeah, whatever. Having a great dinner and dirty talk, whatever. You can explore the I don't know, it's a diversity in the spectrum of pleasure.
And sorry, just to add on a little bit, I think also with just in general with society, men are praised for being macho and having sexual partners and being active, but women are shamed. And I think that's why sex positive panels, talks, everything that I do is completely biased into normalizing women's sexuality. And that's one of the reasons why. The issue of body count, like it's midnight, reset the body count, it's the new day, take the pressure off women, because a lot of what we do with our bodies is often linked to whether we are the good women or the bad women. And I often say, even in some of the programming around in communities, still classes and puts this hierarchy within even the target audience, where you have the better ones, and then you've got those other ones. And so it's the prizing of bodies and what sex looks like, and the fact that women, unfortunately, get punished for being certain types, of women.
Thank you very much. And I am very sorry to say that we're coming to the end of this panel, because I know there's a lot of other people who have questions. But I just want to say, this is the first time there's been a pleasure panel at the International Family Planning Conference. And let's make sure it's not the last time. So we've opened up an amazing space here. And like our panelists have said, take this, start having conversations, broaden this out. This needs to be normalized, these types of conversations. So I would like to thank all of our panelists today. Really, you're amazing. Please connect with them after this conference.
Thank you for coming.
I would also really like to thank the organizers of this conference to be able to make this space and make it possible for us to join in this room. That's really fantastic. And I'd also like to say there's a heads up later on, because the CEO pitches will be taking place later on this afternoon in this room. And there may be one about pleasure. There may be one there about pleasure. So just spoiler alert, you might want to attend and check that out. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Michelle.